The weeks rolled by, and the streets became Elias's new classroom. Every encounter, every glance, every whispered conversation taught him lessons that no boardroom ever could. He saw the quiet suffering of people who had no choice but to endure, and in their faces he saw a reflection of what he might have become if fortune had never smiled on him. Survival was a teacher unlike any other. It demanded patience, humility, and an awareness that no man can truly thrive alone. Mama Ruth continued to guide him, her presence both steady and fierce. She had an uncanny way of knowing when Elias faltered, when pride tried to creep back into his thoughts. "Strength isn't about fighting for yourself, Elias," she said one damp morning, her voice gravelly but warm. "It's about helping someone fight for themselves, even when you have nothing to give." Elias listened, but understanding was a slow process. At first, he helped with small things, carrying water, sharing meals, guiding someone to a safer corner for the night. Each act was deliberate, careful, and yet his heart was heavy. Pride and shame rustled within him. He had once commanded thousands. Now he could barely command respect from those he wished to help. One afternoon, he met a boy no older than 12, sitting beside a pile of old rags and muttering to himself. The boy's eyes were wide with fear and determination, and his hands were raw from picking through trash. Elias knelt beside him. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Jide," the boy replied, wary but curious. "Do you want something to eat?" Elias offered. The boy hesitated, scanning him as though trying to decide if this stranger would harm him. When Elias held out a small piece of bread, Jide's face lit up with a mixture of relief and wonder. He accepted it, nibbling slowly. "You shouldn't be on the streets alone," Elias said gently. "Where are your parents?" "They left. Said I'd be fine. I'm fine." Elias didn't argue. Instead, he sat beside him, silent, letting the boy eat. In that silence, he realized something profound. Survival on the streets wasn't just physical. It was a constant negotiation with fear, with loss, with hope that no one promised you. That evening, as they parted ways, Elias felt an unfamiliar ache. It was compassion, raw and insistent, but also a quiet awakening. He began seeking out the people like Jide, those who were invisible to the world, but who carried stories heavy enough to bend shoulders far older than theirs. Each interaction left him exhausted, yet he felt richer in a way he had never imagined. Mama Ruth noticed the change. "You are becoming one of us, Elias," she said one evening as they sat under the dim glow of a streetlight. "Not a beggar, not a billionaire. You are learning to see people for what they are, and that is a rare kind of wealth." The words sunk in slowly. For decades, Elias had measured life in numbers, in deals, in status. Now he measured it differently, in smiles, in tears, in moments of genuine connection. He began to understand that empathy could be cultivated, that noticing another's pain and responding was a form of currency far more valuable than any banknote he had once held. One particularly harsh morning, Mama Ruth fell ill. Her small body shook with fever, and she could barely manage to walk to the food lines. Elias panicked. For the first time, he realized that he was responsible for someone else's survival in a way that mattered. He ran through the streets, gathering coins, pleading for medicine, and bargaining for food with street vendors. Each step was a lesson in humility, how to ask without shame, how to negotiate without aggression, how to find hope in desperation. When he returned to Mama Ruth with a small parcel of medicine and food, she looked at him with tired, knowing eyes. She said, "You are learning faster than I expected," she coughed lightly. "Remember, Elias, a person's true strength is revealed in how they care for others when there is nothing left to give." Elias nodded, a lump in his throat. He realized then that the streets were not cruel by accident. They were precise teachers. They stripped away vanity, arrogance, and pride, leaving only the essence of a person. And in that essence, he discovered a resilience that no amount of wealth could create. Days blurred into nights, and Elias's understanding deepened. He began noticing the small acts of kindness that passed unnoticed by the world. A woman sharing her soup with a cold child. A man offering his only blanket to another who shivered beside him. A stranger holding a hand steady for someone who had lost their footing. Each moment was a lesson. Each gesture a story that wove together the fragile yet unbreakable fabric of human dignity. Elias started documenting these acts in his mind, remembering faces, stories, and details. He saw patterns, the ways people survived, adapted, and sometimes thrived despite everything against them. And slowly he began applying these observations to himself, to how he moved through the streets, how he interacted with others, how he made choices that were not about survival alone, but about creating ripples of goodness. One evening, as the sky darkened and the city lights flickered on, Elias sat beside a small fire, warming his hands and reflecting. He thought of the empire he had lost, the fortune that had vanished, the friends who had abandoned him. And he understood, with a clarity that frightened and humbled him, that all of that had been a test in disguise. He had been wealthy, yes, but blind. Blind to human struggle, blind to true connection, blind to the invisible world that existed right under his nose. It was Grace, a young volunteer who brought water and blankets to the street at regular intervals, who finally voiced what Elias was beginning to realize. "You're not like the others," she said softly one afternoon. "You see us. You care. You understand." He looked at her, unsure if he should admit the truth. I didn't before," he said quietly. "I couldn't. I had everything. I thought I needed nothing else." She smiled faintly, as if she had expected this answer. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. Her words struck him like a revelation, and in that revelation, a seed of purpose took root, a purpose that had nothing to do with wealth, power, or status, and everything to do with human dignity, empathy, and transformation. The weeks that followed were a series of small victories. Elias learned to negotiate with street vendors not just for food, but for respect. He mediated disputes among those he had once overlooked, using insight and calm rather than money to influence outcomes. He saw the city through the eyes of those who lived on its margins, and in doing so, he began to reconstruct his understanding of success. It was no longer measured by property or possessions, but by impact, by the quiet shifts in the lives of people around him. And yet, amidst all this learning, he carried a quiet question in his heart. What was next? He had survived, yes, and he had grown. But how could he take this knowledge, this empathy, this understanding, and transform it into something lasting? He didn't know the answer yet, but he trusted the process. He trusted the streets that had taught him so much, and he trusted Mama Ruth, who had quietly become his anchor in this turbulent new world. By the time the rainy season came, Elias was no longer the desperate man who had stumbled into the city weeks before. He moved with purpose, spoke with understanding, and acted with consideration. People noticed. Some whispered about the stranger who walked with humility, who helped without expectation, who seemed to understand the city's hidden truths. And though he had nothing but his clothes and his mind, he began to feel a sense of wealth he had never known, the wealth of connection, of knowledge, of unshakable resilience. One evening, as the rain fell in cold sheets and the city lights shimmered like distant stars, Elias sat beside Mama Ruth. She handed him a cup of warm tea, her hand shaking slightly. "Do you understand now, Elias?" He nodded. "I think I do. It's not money. It's everything else. It's how you see the world, how you care, how you act when there is nothing to gain." Mama Ruth smiled, her eyes glistening. "Exactly. And the people who learn this, they are the ones who will truly survive, even if the world takes everything else." Elias sipped the tea, warmth spreading through him in more ways than one. He thought of Jeed, of Daniel, of the countless faces he had met. Each had taught him something, and in return he had offered what he could, small though it might have been. He realized then that the streets had done more than teach him survival. They had awakened him to humanity itself. And in that awakening, Elias glimpsed a horizon beyond mere existence, beyond survival, where his life could have purpose, impact, and meaning, where wealth was measured not by possessions, but by lives touched, dignity restored, and hope rekindled. For the first time in months, Elias slept without fear, without hunger consuming his thoughts. And though the future remained uncertain, one truth was clear. Elias was not the man he had been. He had become something more, someone who could rise not by reclaiming wealth, but by rebuilding humanity itself, beginning with himself.